Bleeding purple and gold. From the heart of Los Angeles, this is the LakersNation.com podcast with your host, Trevor Lane.
Welcome, Lakers Nation, to today's show. My name is Trevor Lane from LakersNation.com. Guys, also we are powered by CLNS Media, and this show is brought to you today by SeatGeek, Stamps.com, and Simple Contacts. We've got a triumvirate of sponsors today, so we're going to be talking a bit about them later on. Of course, don't forget, guys, head over to iTunes. Make sure you subscribe, rate, and review this show. We certainly would appreciate it. As of right now, we are about a week and a half away from the NBA trade deadline. It's one of my favorite times of the year, so we've got like a million different things to talk about because there's all these different angles with what's happening with the Lakers right now and what's going on in the league and possible trades that are going to be out there and everything. So I thought this is a perfect opportunity to bring on Alex Kennedy of Hoops Hype to help us kind of sort through all of this. Been a little while since we've had you on, Alex. Thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. First of all, congrats on all those sponsors. You guys are loading up. That's awesome.
We are. It's the beginning of the year, and so the sponsors are here for us, and we love it. So we're always excited to have our sponsors on. How's everything going for you, man? I know it's been a few months. I think last time you were on, you were losing your voice, and you somehow gutted it out.
Yeah, it was awful last time. I apologize to the listeners. I had no voice. I was hoarse. It got worse as the podcast went on. Fortunately, this time I have my voice. Things have been going well. I can't complain. I'm always excited. This time of year, Hoops Hype, their rumor page every single day. There's something new. There's crazy rumors, and as February 8th gets closer, I just get more and more excited for some trades to go down. Hopefully, this is an active deadline.
Oh, man, I don't know about you, but, I'm already planning out my February 8th, that morning. Okay, what am I going to do? How am I going to be ready for whatever happens? Because you never know. Sometimes you have a slow deadline, but then I'm sure you remember this. I wish I could remember the year that this was. I want to say it was probably 3 or 4 years ago, where right at the deadline, on the dot, Woj just tweets out, how Woj normally tweets out, I'm talking about Adrian Wojnarowski, of course, of ESPN, tweets out all the details of the trades. He's usually the first one on it. And he just tweeted out 2 words. He said, "Good Lord."
Yeah, I think it was 3 years ago. I think someone retweeted that tweet recently. So I think it was 3 years ago. But yeah, that summed up that deadline. It was pretty crazy. I mean, and there's years like that where you have a bunch of buyers, so there's a bunch of trades that go down. A lot of teams willing to give up first-round picks. Unfortunately, I think now teams value their first-round picks so much that they kind of hoard them and don't want to give them up, and that leads to less deals because teams aren't just willing to throw them in like they have been in the past. And this year, I think there's a lot more sellers than buyers. I just recorded a podcast with Brian Windhurst of ESPN, and we kind of broke down the trade landscape. That's going to be up later on Hoops Hype. And, he kind of had the same take that he thinks we won't have a very active deadline, but that we're going to have a super active summer, June, July, in terms of trades. That's when I think a lot of these teams that have big name players could decide to make moves, maybe not before the deadline, but maybe over the offseason. So we shall see.
So yeah, that year with the Woj Good Lord tweet, I think it's something like 23 out of the 30 teams, or maybe 22 out of the 30 teams in the league made some sort of a move at the deadline. But so you're saying you think it's going to be a little bit more quiet this year at the deadline. Which teams do you think are going to be active as we get closer to that February 8th day?
Well, I think there's a lot of sellers. That was one thing that Brian and I talked about on our podcast. You look around the league right now, there's a lot of teams that, are in a position where I think they'd be willing to make, moves and where pretty much everyone's available. Atlanta has a lot of veterans. I could see them moving because they're rebuilding. Orlando has a new regime and they have, Evan Fournier, Aaron Gordon, Nick Vucevic, Elfrid Payton, a lot of guys there that are available, I believe, for the right offer. Utah, Sam Amick came on my podcast last week and said Utah is an open shop, that everyone's available. He said he's heard that they're shopping Derek Favors, Rodney Hood, Ricky Rubio, basically everyone but Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. Things in Memphis right now are crazy. You have Mike Conley out for the year. There was the rumor that broke about Chandler Parsons being asked to retire due to injury. So that makes you wonder, okay, what happens with Marc Gasol? I think Tyreek Evans is a lock to get traded. So you have a lot of teams that are struggling, that are sellers. The question is, who are the buyers? Cleveland is an obvious buyer. I think they want to make multiple moves to improve their defense specifically. Right now, they're number 30 in the NBA in defense. So they, I think, want to make a few different moves if they can. Other than that, though, New Orleans, I think they've talked about replacing DeMarcus Cousins potentially. OKC, I think, is a buyer looking for shooting, and now probably someone to replace Andre Roberson. So there's a number of buyers out there, but way more sellers, and that's just why I think we're not going to see as many moves. The years that are crazy are when there's a ton of buyers, and usually the years that are crazy too, it's when a lot of teams feel like they have a chance to win the championship. So when there's 6 or 7 teams that feel like they have a legitimate shot, they're willing to go all in and trade away a young piece or a first-round pick to get a veteran that puts them over the top. When there's a dominant team like the Warriors that everyone kind of assumes if they're healthy, they're going to win it all, I think that does kind of make a few different teams pump the brakes a little bit and say, okay, let's not mortgage our future.
Well, see, I feel like the East kind of is wide open with the Cavaliers struggling the way that they are, or are the Warriors so good that even teams in the East are like, man, even if we get to the finals, we don't have a shot? Do you think that's been a factor, or is the East as wide open as it seems to me, where teams like maybe the Raptors would consider making a move?
Yeah, because there is a lot of value in getting to the finals. I think just from a experience standpoint, from a financial standpoint, those teams do want to get to the finals. But this Boston team is really good. I think they're scaring off some of these teams. And maybe a team like there was a rumor that Boston could be in the mix for Tyreek Evans.
I saw that.
That's pretty interesting. I think he makes a lot of sense for them. The question is, are they giving up one of the guys at the end of their bench? They're not going to give up a significant contributor for him. But Brian Windhorst on my podcast said that he could see Tyreek Evans being dealt for a second-round pick because Memphis, they're not really in a position where they have a lot of leverage. They're a struggling team. He's on an ending contract. So, I mean, it kind of comes down to, get what you can for him. So that's where Tyreek Evans to Boston becomes very interesting. So maybe Boston makes a move. Toronto could certainly make a move. Last year they were one of the teams that were really active, adding, Serge Ibaka, adding PJ Tucker. And then Cleveland wants to make a move. I think after that, though, teams like Milwaukee, Philadelphia, I think they have their eyes set in the future. They're hoping that they can be contenders 3-4 years down the line whenever the Warriors are potentially declining. So, Sam Amick, for example, on the podcast said that Milwaukee's been linked to a lot of different guys like DeAndre Jordan and guys like that, but they haven't gotten serious or down the road with any of their trade talks because they're not willing to make any of their core pieces available. They're not talking about any of their significant contributors. They're not making them available in trade talks. So it's really a non-starter and their discussions with other teams. So that's where I think, after the top 3 teams in the East, Boston, Toronto, Cleveland, every other team, I feel like, Miami, Washington, Milwaukee, Indiana, Philly, I think those teams are in a position where, maybe they look to make some kind of minor moves, but I don't think they're making any kind of big move to try to put them in position to win the East because I think it's pretty much a 3-team race at this point. The teams that are kind of interesting are teams that are kind of fringe teams in the East. Detroit finds themselves right outside of the playoff picture. Charlotte is currently paying a ton of money for their roster. They're right outside the playoff picture. Do those teams, if they continue to struggle, turn into sellers? Detroit has lost 8 straight games. So if, Avery Bradley and guys like that become available, all of a sudden the deadline is more interesting. If Kemba Walker is available, then all of a sudden that's the big name that we're talking about at the deadline. So some of those teams, I'm kind of interested to see what they do.
We're going to take a quick break so I can tell you guys about an awesome time-saving trick here. Simple Contacts is a company that provides contact lenses. I don't wear contact lenses myself, so I introduced one of my good friends to their program, and he absolutely loves it. He got his contact lens prescription renewed from his couch yesterday in about 5 minutes, and it's using the Simple Contacts app that he was able to get that done. Simple Contacts actually lets you renew your prescription and reorder your brand of lenses from anywhere in minutes through an online vision test. It's not a replacement for your periodic full eye health exam, but it is designed by doctors, and every test is reviewed by a doctor, so they're bringing the doctor's office to your home. The contact lens prices are unbeatable. My buddy is blown away at the prices that he's getting. The vision test only costs $20 and shipping is free. Best of all, my listeners will get $30 off their first Simple Contacts order. All you have to do is go to simplecontacts.com/LakersNation. Try it for yourself. Save $30 on your lenses. Go to simplecontacts.com/LakersNation. Again, simplecontacts.com/LakersNation.
Well, now you wrote a piece, I don't remember exactly how long ago it was. I want to say it was probably about 6 months ago, maybe a little more, all about how trades get done in the NBA. And it was a wonderful piece, but when I'm looking at the news that's coming out right now, that we're a week and a half from the trade deadline, I feel like a lot of what we're seeing is posturing. When we're seeing teams like, well, you mentioned Kemba Walker. We saw that report that Kemba Walker would only be traded for an all-star level player, and that was Michael Jordan saying that. And then Rob Pelinka from the Lakers said we'll only do a move if it moves us up the NBA mountain. And I saw a report that the Dallas Mavericks are willing to move Wesley Matthews, but only if they get a first-round pick in return. And so it feels like a lot of teams are trying to kind of gain leverage right now, whereas talks will become a little bit more real and they'll get a little bit more serious within the next week or so as we get closer and closer to that deadline. Is that a fairly accurate assessment of what we're seeing right now?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think anytime someone goes on the record around this time of year, you have to take what they say with a grain of salt because they're saying it for a reason. Now, sometimes it is to put out a fire. Sometimes they really aren't shopping the player that's being mentioned and the guy's upset, so they are going on the record to shoot down any kind of controversy. I think that's what happened with the Kawhi Leonard situation when R.C. Buford really denied any kind of rift. I think he was trying to make sure that didn't escalate and get to the point where it was a problem. But Michael Jordan talking about Kemba Walker, it's one of those things where on the record he's saying that because if you don't trade the guy, you have to stick with him and you don't want him to be upset. You want him to feel like the organization has his back. So I think teams are always prepared for that. They have to make sure the guy's not upset. But then, you talk to people around the league and they say that Charlotte has had conversations about Kemba Walker and it wouldn't take an all-star to get him just because their financial situation is so ugly right now that I think they're looking at everything, including, Kemba. And I think what they want to do with Kemba potentially is package him with a big contract like a Nick Batum, who's been struggling this year. And potentially, move them both off. So that's kind of what they're talking about with teams. And I think whenever guys go on the record, they're saying things like that so the players don't get upset and so they can gain leverage in their talks. They're having conversations behind the scenes and then they say something publicly hoping that, it affects another team's offer or makes more offers come in. That's why around this time of year, I know people hate anonymous sources, but executives will talk an awful lot about what other teams are doing. Typically, executives won't talk about what their own team is doing because they don't really want to leak out there, obviously. But they'll tell you, hey, this team called us and they're offering so-and-so. Or, this team is shopping this guy and here's what they want in return. Executives will talk about other teams. So that's why around this time of year, I trust anonymous sources much more than I trust people going on the record and saying things for a reason, typically to help themselves in talks.
Wait, so you mean that the teams actually want to build up their players and their trade assets? That's kind of going against what Phil Jackson did, right? Are you telling me that Phil Jackson was wrong for tearing down Carmelo Anthony and then trying to trade him? Come on.
That was the craziest thing to me. Anytime a team does that, and Phil's not the first guy to do that, he's not going to be the last. Anytime a team goes out there and kills their bargaining power in trade talks, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I'm always scratching my head. And that's where you can just tell that It's not something that is strategic. It's not something that they're doing. It's someone that is just very frustrated and fed up and saying something that they're going to regret. And I think that's what that was. There was nothing about that, Phil is, when he was a coach, obviously, he was a master of, getting in guys' heads and managing egos, and a master of almost manipulation.
Yep.
As an executive, I think that was him just being fed up and saying something he absolutely shouldn't have.
Yeah, he went a bit too far there. Hey, let's talk about these Lakers heading into the trade deadline. What do you see them doing? We've heard tons of rumors that the three guys that they're willing to move are Jordan Clarkson, Julius Randle, and Larry Nance Jr. So what do you make of their situation?
Well, I was a bit surprised to see Larry Nance Jr. mentioned, because I think he helps them so much every time he's on the court. I think he, makes great plays. I think he's extremely efficient. He knows his role. And he's one of the best guys in the league in terms of, personality, being a great teammate, supporting his teammates. So I was surprised to see his name, and I think he would draw a lot of interest, and maybe that's why, he's coming up, because other teams are calling about him. But I honestly don't think I would make a move with Nance Jr. or Julius Randle. I think I would shop Jordan Clarkson and see what the market is for him. Obviously, the Lakers aren't going to make any kind of move where they're taking back salary, because they want to preserve their cap space. They want to clear cap space so that they can go out and sign 2 max contracts. They've made that very clear. I've actually found it really interesting kind of talking to the players off the record and on the record. I've talked to a few different Laker players. Larry Nance was on my podcast, and he said that, we kind of talked about what the rumors about LeBron James and Paul George and DeMarcus Cousins do to the current team, and, how that makes guys feel. And he admitted that, he said the Lakers are the number one team when it comes to rumors and, star potential acquisitions and things like that. And he said, so if you're looking over your shoulder and you're worried about getting traded, it's absolutely warranted. It's absolutely valid, because there's so many rumors out there. So I think there's this reality that anyone could get traded, and players recognize that, and they're somewhat worried about it. But I don't think any kind of move is inevitable. I look at the market for a guy like Julius Randle, and I think he's a great player, but, you talk about teams where he fits. Like, I think New Orleans would be perfect for him, but they have no assets, and they're basically hard capped. It's just hard to find a potential deal for some of these players. I think they would love to get, rid of Luol Deng and that contract. Maybe that's a buyout conversation that ends up happening. I know he had some quotes recently where he was saying that he basically said, either trade me or buy me out. We'll see if he's willing to leave money on the table. It really comes down to what his priorities are. Does he want to get out of LA so badly that he's willing to leave money on the table? And is there a team out there that's willing to bring him in? If not for his on-court purpose, then, to have him in the locker room as a veteran presence and someone that, is beneficial in the locker room. So I think those are kind of the guys to watch. Those are the 4. I think of all of them, Clarkson is the most likely to get traded. I would hold on to Randle and Nance Jr. That's just me. I think those guys, I don't think now is the time to move on from them. I think they still have a lot of potential. I like their games a lot. Obviously, there's a lot of duplication in that front court when you talk about those guys, Kyle Kuzma. So, maybe there's something to the rumors, but I wouldn't move them unless there was a great offer that I simply couldn't turn down.
Yeah, I think that the danger, and I've talked about this on the show before, but the danger for the Lakers is if you go ahead and move these guys, say you move Jordan Clarkson for just an expiring contract, just a guy that's not really going to help you much, and then you don't land those big-time free agents in the summer, well, then you've just weakened your team. You've weakened your team down the home stretch of the season, which means you probably lose more games, and then you don't get anything for it. That's going to be a really bad look for the franchise overall if you part with a piece like that, a young guy like Jordan Clarkson who's on a fairly reasonable contract, and then you don't really get much return for him, because it's maybe this is just me, but I feel like Jordan Clarkson, if you're trying to get an expiring contract for him, you're probably not going to get a whole lot in the way of any other kind of value, because most teams will see giving up that expiring contract as the payment for Clarkson. They're probably not going to throw in like a pick or anything like that on top of it.
Yeah, you're right. I agree with you. And that's kind of what Windhorst said on my podcast, too, that the Lakers could end up looking very bad if they trade away Randall and Clarkson and then, either strike out, or even if you get one of these guys, if Paul George comes, you can still afford to keep Randall potentially. You don't have to get rid of multiple players. They obviously want to have that option to have 2 max contracts. I think that's what, you keep hearing. That's what they've been talking about. But you're right. I mean, it kind of reminds you of the Knicks leading up to 2010, where they traded away a bunch of guys. They had some nice offers come in actually, and they turned all of them down because they didn't want to take back any money. And then they got Amari Stoudemire. And obviously, that did lead to Carmelo Anthony wanting to go there. He was the first star to go there, but they thought they were going to be in the market for LeBron James and Chris Bosh and all these other star free agents that ended up, not even considering New York that heavily. So that's always the risk. You don't want to make those kind of moves and then strike out. And I agree with you there.
So as far as Larry Nance Jr. goes, one of the things that I've been looking at with him, and you're right, he's a phenomenal guy. He's been on this show a number of times, usually comes on here about once a month or so and gives us kind of an update on the season, how everything's been going with him. And he's awesome. He's great in the locker room. He's that guy that if the game is out of hand in the fourth quarter, the Lakers can be down by 20. And it doesn't matter to him. He's still diving on the floor. He's still making all the hustle plays. He doesn't have an off switch. He just keeps going. And every team needs a guy like that. He may not be a starter. He may not be a star. But he's the kind of role player that every team needs. But I keep looking at this situation. I think, I feel like there's a good chance that Larry Nance Jr. is going to be in the dunk contest this year. And the dunk contest is going to be taking place a couple weeks, about a week and a half after the trade deadline passes. So if you're the Lakers, do you think it would be something where maybe they're reluctant to actually trade him unless they get a phenomenal return? Because otherwise, if you trade him at the deadline and then he goes and does the dunk contest, that means All-Star Weekend at Staples Center in front of the entire league, he'd be wearing someone else's jersey. I feel like that's got to be some sort of a factor in their thought process.
I really don't know. I don't think executives worry about that kind of stuff. It would be incredibly awkward and weird. Don't get me wrong. I see what you're saying. I think, it would be unfortunate. And Larry on my podcast, he reiterated that he loves LA. He wants to stay with the Lakers. He could see himself staying there long term. He's like, I hope management and fans feel the same way about me as I feel about the franchise. So he really wants to stay in LA. So it'd be unfortunate because he'd be unhappy, and then you'd have the awkwardness of the dunk contest. Now, I don't know if he'll be in the dunk contest. I don't have any inside information there. He said on my podcast that he's interested, that he wants to do it. He said that, if the league extended an invitation, he would accept it. But I don't know if he's going to be in it for sure. I would predict that he would be, just because, we've seen what he can do, and he's shown enough interest over the years. This is his third year in the league now. Every year he's shown interest. I know in the past he almost did it, but had an injury. So, he pulled out to be cautious and didn't accept the invitation for that reason. So there's always been some interest there and some, flirting with it. So I could see him doing it. I don't necessarily think that would factor into, Rob Pelinka's decision-making process, though, at the deadline. I think that, executives, they have to be really emotionless when it comes to their moves, and that's difficult. So I think, whenever they're considering these kind of things, they try to block out the player's family and personal life and off-court situation. And I think that would just be another one of those things they block out. Yeah, it would suck. It'd be weird. It'd be awkward. But I don't think that's something that, would hinder a move. I think, the on-court production of Larry and what he brings to the team, his great contract, his value in the locker room, his long-term potential, I think those are things that probably keep him in LA more so than any awkwardness that would come from, having that dunk contest in Staples Center. But I see what you're saying. It would be very weird.
We'll be back with more great stuff with Alex Kennedy in just a moment. But first, we're going to talk about Stamps.com, the These days, you can get just about anything online and on demand. Did you know that you can even get postage on demand with Stamps.com? Well, you can. With Stamps.com, you can print real U.S. postage for any letter or any package right from your home or office, all available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, when it's convenient for you. Stamps.com will even send you a digital scale so you can weigh your letters and packages and print the exact amount of postage every time. It's so easy to use. Just click, print, mail, and you're done. Stamps.com is a no-brainer. Stamps.com will save you so much time. You can access all the services of the post office right from your desk. It's never been easier to send out your letters and packages. Here at Lakers Nation, we are really busy. This is Los Angeles after all. So we rely on Stamps.com to print out shipping labels so we can send out our prizes and all of our mail. It couldn't be easier. I've even worked out a special offer with Stamps.com for my listeners that includes a 4-week trial plus postage and a digital scale without a long-term commitment. All you have to do is go to Stamps.com, click the microphone at the top of the homepage, and type in NATION. That's Stamps.com. Enter that code NATION. It's a no-brainer. Go check them out.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I think you're right that ultimately teams are going to have to look past stuff like that, even if it was awkward and everything. But I guess maybe it's just kind of the icing on the cake if they do decide to hang on to him, is that then he gets to wear that Lakers jersey in front of the crowd to do the dunk contest, assuming he does wind up in the dunk contest, which is not official at this point. We just don't know. Alex, you already mentioned this, but Mike Conley, he's done for the season. Andre Robertson is done for the season with a patellar injury. I mean, this has been the weekend of major injuries. Of course, we have to talk about DeMarcus Cousins and his torn Achilles. To me, as someone who covers the Los Angeles Lakers, a team that is looking to sign max free agents, I feel like potentially this is a max free agent kind of off the board this summer. I'm sure some teams will still pursue him, but now there's some major question marks here. I guess first question, before we dive too deep into Cousins, is do you think his injury is going to have a big impact on the trade deadline coming up? Like, are teams going to be trying to push for that 8th seed in the Western Conference because of this? Are the New Orleans Pelicans going to act differently, trying to hang on to their playoff spot? I mean, this has got to have some serious ripple effects.
Yeah, I think it does. If you're a team like Portland or Denver or the LA Clippers, who are just right outside, they're in the 9th seed right now, but they're only a game back. Even a team like the Utah Jazz, I mentioned them earlier as being a seller, but I think, they're looking to make moves that, surround Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert with talent. So even, they're kind of a buyer/seller. I could see them moving off someone like Derek Favors if he's going to leave and try to get something in return. But the reason they're looking to move off a guy like Rodney Hood is because Donovan Mitchell has really emerged, and I think they'd only accept, really good packages for those kind of guys. So the Jazz could be looking to sell off some players, but then also be buyers and bring in some guys that help to make a playoff push. So I think from that standpoint where, the LA Clippers at one point, if they were completely out of the playoff picture and, had no shot of making the playoffs, that's where DeAndre Jordan maybe gets traded, or Lou Williams, they sell him off because he's in a situation where he's having an amazing year on an amazing contract and he's in an ending contract. So, typically you would think, okay, Lou Williams probably gets traded, but if they have a shot at making the playoffs, maybe that changes. I think with New Orleans, it's difficult. Alvin Gentry came out and said they're going to look at possible moves to bring in a big man, but I just don't see the assets that they have to trade for a significant big man. Obviously, there's no replacing a guy like Cousins because he brings so much to the table. He's one of the best big men in the NBA, obviously. But, even if you're talking about the guys that are available, we just did an article recently on HoopSite where we kind of broke down some options where, who could be available in a trade for them. We looked at Derek Favors and, we looked at Channing Frye and Robin Lopez, Nick Vucevic, guys like that. But they just, the Pelicans, basically any trade would have to involve Etuan Moore, maybe Darius Miller, and then really those are their assets. They don't really, I don't think they want to part with their first round pick. And they're in a situation where they're their financial situation is just so ugly. They're almost hard capped, which means it's almost impossible for them to take back any salary in a trade. So that's where it becomes extremely difficult to find a replacement for Cousins. So I think they'll try to find a deal where the salaries line up perfectly, or they're taking back less salary. But that's hard to do without, trading away a pick. But yeah, I think more than anything, I think Oklahoma City, a team that is just sitting right ahead of them by 2.5 games, they're already looking to be buyers anyway, because they're looking for shooting, they're looking for depth. They want to be a contender this year, and go all in with Carmelo and Paul George. So they were already a buyer, but I think this kind of just pushes them even further to be a buyer. And then, as you mentioned, the teams that are kind of below them in the standings, I could see them being buyers as well.
So with Cousins' injury, from the Lakers' perspective, there's obviously all these question marks that are now around him. I mean, this is not an easy injury to recover from. There's a lot of factors in play here. Do you think this is going to scare teams away, like the Lakers, from making a push for Cousins in free agency? I mean, what's the impact going to be come July when July 1st hits and he's a free agent?
Yeah, it could impact his value. That's what really sucks about this. Not only was he, about to make his postseason debut, he's a free agent this summer, so it's really unfortunate to see him go down. I think, as you mentioned, this is not an easy injury to recover from, so I could see it impacting his value. But he's just so talented that there's going to be some team out there that's going to give him a huge contract still. I'm not sure if he'll have the same market, but I think that there's going to be significant interest in him either way. And I think the Pelicans, they really want to keep him. They've made that pretty clear that, you saw the comments that Anthony Davis had where he was saying you need multiple star players to contend in the NBA these days. And he pointed out, Boston and Golden State and Houston. And, he's really developed a good friendship with DeMarcus Cousins as well. So I could see the Pelicans wanting to re-sign him. But it'll be interesting to see how it impacts his free agency because, as you mentioned, it's a tough injury.
So I actually put this on Twitter today as a Twitter poll, and it got, I think, a few thousand votes, and it ended up in a dead tie. It ended up 50-50 on this. And the question that I asked was, despite the injury, should a team like the Lakers go after DeMarcus Cousins this summer? What's your take? If you were helming the Lakers, you're running the team, what would you do? Would the injury scare you off, or do you think that the Boogie is just so good that it's worth making a push for him?
I think it depends on your options, really. If Paul George is going to come, then obviously that's the number one move that I would make. I love Paul George's game. He's back to 100% from his injury. I was watching the Thunder Sixers game tonight, and the things he does on both ends are just phenomenal. So Paul George would be the number one guy I'm looking at, assuming, obviously LeBron James is the number one target, right. But Paul George seems like the most realistic candidate. So I'm looking at Paul George. But then DeMarcus Cousins, certainly I do think if they are able to clear 2 max spaces, or even if they're not, maybe this could be where they get Paul George on a max contract potentially. Let's just speak hypothetically. Mm-hmm. Maybe this allows them to get DeMarcus Cousins a little bit cheaper than expected. I would go after him. He's 27 years old. He's having the best year of his career. He's improved so much, not only on the court, but also off the court. I think he's matured a ton. He's way better in the locker room. His teammates rave about him. So I would I would go after him as a free agent. I was surprised last year there wasn't a bigger market for him whenever he was traded from Sacramento. And I was stunned that New Orleans was able to get him for, what they offered. And from what I heard, the Kings didn't talk to every team in the league. They had limited conversations, and that's kind of why they got the trade they did. So I think I would go after him in free agency. I love his game. He's 27, as I mentioned, so he's still pretty young. I would definitely target him. Yeah, but I think he'd be my second option after Paul George.
We're going to pause for just one moment so I can talk about SeatGeek. Now, the SeatGeek app is one that is on my phone right now and has been for some time. It is the easiest way I've found to shop for tickets. I can be anywhere, and in just a few taps, I can have tickets to a sporting event, concert, you name it, you can find it on SeatGeek. It saves you a ton of time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find amazing deals, and I have found some great ones using this app. To get the most bang for your buck, SeatGeek actually grades every ticket based on value to help you immediately identify the best seats that are going to fit your budget, so you don't have to wonder about whether or not you're getting a good deal. Plus, every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop the tickets on SeatGeek with confidence. Make SeatGeek your go-to app for finding the best deals on every type of ticket, from sports and concerts to comedy and theater. And best of all, SeatGeek has sponsored with Lakers Nation to offer $20 off your first purchase just because you are a listener of this show. All you have to do is download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code NATION. That's promo code NATION, and you get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. So go download the app. Again, it's SeatGeek. Enter that promo code NATION to let them know you came from us, and you'll get $20 off.
Yeah, let's talk about the Paul George thing here in just a second. I do remember the whole Boogie Cousins trade and that whole situation. There was a lot of rumors going around at the time that the Kings, when they talked to the Lakers, they wanted Brandon Ingram and other pieces in exchange for DeMarcus Cousins. But then when they talked to the Pelicans, all they wanted was Buddy Hield and pieces like that, because their owner happens to love Buddy Hield, and so they ended up getting what they got. And I think most people would say they probably didn't get enough for Cousins. You mentioned that DeMarcus Cousins and Anthony Davis have been saying some kind words to each other, and Anthony Davis is becoming friends with him. We're starting to see the same thing with Paul George, right? I mean, Russell Westbrook sticks up for Paul George when he doesn't initially make the All-Star team, and Paul George says that helps to make the decision easier for him in the summer. And I mean, and OKC is on an 8-game win streak at this point. These are all very, very bad things from the Lakers' point of view. So where do you see things right now? Like, how likely is it that you think the Lakers actually get some of these stars? Because right now, Lakers fans are kind of feeling like it's looking more doubtful at this point.
Yeah, that's a great question. At one point, I thought Paul George to the Lakers was a lock. I really did. Over the offseason, I thought Paul George was saying all the right things because he had to about Oklahoma City. But recently, that comment after Russell Westbrook stood up for him when he didn't make the All-Star team initially, that said a lot to me because it was unprompted. It's not like someone said, "Oh, does Russell Westbrook standing up for you make your decision easier?" No, he was just asked in general about Westbrook standing up for him, and he's the one that said, things like that make my decision easier. I have to think about that when I make my decision. That was the strongest pro-OKC comment we've seen from him, I think, since he got there. Mm-hmm. So that really stood out to me. I think if you're an OKC fan, you have to love hearing that from him. But I don't think anything's been decided yet. I think that, they're going to get through this season, see what happens, and then I think Paul George is going to sit down and kind of weigh all of his options over the summer. But no, I mean, if you're a Laker fan, certainly you're feeling a little bit worse about where things stand now versus where they were, even a few weeks ago. Because at that point, you hadn't had Paul George come out and make those statements. The Thunder weren't playing as well. DeMarcus Cousins was healthy, so he was still, a perfect option, seemingly. The only positive right now, I would say, is all the stuff happening with the Cavaliers. They're really struggling right now, and not only are they struggling, but you have tons of drama behind the scenes where guys are calling each other out in team meetings. Guys are upset with each other. They're 30th in defense. As we mentioned, there's no, real answer, it seems, for this team. So if Cleveland were to have an early exit, that's where I think LeBron really weighs his options. And if you really look at where LeBron can go, he wants to leave Cleveland. There's not a long list of teams that can really get him. I mean, obviously teams can make moves and clear cap space and all that, but if we're looking at the list of teams right now, I know people have talked about Philadelphia, but even they don't have a max contract, I don't believe. Houston has been mentioned, but they'd have to make a lot of different cap moves to make that work. and keep everyone else, keep the key players there. San Antonio has been mentioned by a few people, and that was kind of interesting. You had LeBron today wishing Greg Popovich happy birthday, which, I don't want to read too much into, obviously, right. But San Antonio is always a sleeper team because they're just such a great organization. It wouldn't surprise me if any star player went there. That's kind of how I view them. But there's not a long list of teams that can really afford him right now or are too attractive to him. So that's where I think if the LA thing, I'll say this about LeBron to LA. David Griffin was on my podcast recently, and he said that he never believed whenever he took over the Cavaliers job that LeBron was coming back. He said that best case scenario, he thought they would, maybe get him down the line. He never thought that summer LeBron would come back. But he said the first thing that happened whenever he started hearing LeBron rumblings was he heard that they were looking at schools and that he was looking at homes. And that was kind of the first signs that LeBron may be considering a return. So I thought that was interesting because if that's kind of his process, and you're hearing now all of a sudden that he just bought a new mansion in LA, right. You're hearing about, there was the rumor that he looked at, a school in Los Angeles. Sam Amick on my podcast said that was a misunderstanding and he was just there to put up shots during a break of a commercial shoot that was happening nearby. We don't know, but if you go by what David Griffin was saying, it's kind of interesting just to hear that that was what LeBron did in the past, and then now you're kind of hearing those same things about LA versus other destinations. So it's possible. Obviously, he has the off-court ventures there, and he has the television shows that he is really involved in, and different businesses. Magic Johnson is there, and that's something that he really respects. So I see the off-court stuff. I don't necessarily see the on-court potential unless they are able to get a Paul George and someone else to team up with him there. But that was a huge tangent. To answer your initial question, I do see what you're saying about, this has been a tough couple of weeks for Laker fans, kind of seeing how things have developed. But I would say July is a long way away, and a lot can change between now and then.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And to your point about the whole LeBron thing, I mean, if LeBron suddenly decides to come to LA, that could change everything. That could sway Paul George to join up. That could sway DeMarcus Cousins, whoever he wants. I mean, LeBron has that kind of pull where he's going to bring other people with him. So maybe the Lakers are banking on that. I mean, we know that they get to talk to Rich Paul all the time, who's his agent, because Kentavious Caldwell-Pope is a Laker. So it's going to be definitely something to keep an eye on. Alex, this has been awesome. We've covered a ton of topics here as we get closer to the trade deadline. Certainly appreciate all your expertise on this. Do you have anything coming up? Anything that all the fans and listeners should be aware of?
Well, I would say the Brian Windhorst podcast. Make sure you check that out. That's going to go online Monday morning on hoopshype.com. It's also on Audio Boom and iTunes and all those different podcast sites. So make sure you guys check out that podcast. We went around the league and talked about, basically every team and player that's been mentioned in trade rumors recently, and we did a deep dive on the Cleveland stuff. I have a long-form article on Kevin Durant coming out where I had an exclusive interview with KD, and really we focused on how he's impacted the next generation of players, because there were 3 years in a row where in the rookie survey, he was named as the most popular player in the NBA that rookies said was their favorite player. And if you go to the draft combine or you talk to a lot of high school and college players, they all talk about, how KD's mentored them and how they look up to him and things like that. So I found that really interesting. I think you always hear about that stuff with LeBron because he has, he has a lot of different guys that he's mentored, and we hear about that quite often. But Kevin Durant has, he has his Kevin Durant Skills Academy. He recently invested in that company Overtime that posts highlights of high school players. And now he's doing this weekly thing where he reviews film of the top high school players and gives them advice on his YouTube channel. So, and a lot of the high school players, have talked about that, and they talk about how cool it is to have someone like KD, giving advice to them. So I talked to KD, and then I talked to about 20 young NBA players about the impact that KD has had on them. So that was a kind of a cool story to work on. And then I have a few other different Q&As that I have coming up in the next 2 weeks. But those are kind of the things that are on tap in the near future.
Awesome. That sounds amazing. I'm definitely going to be looking forward to seeing that. The piece on Kevin Durant, that sounds absolutely phenomenal. Alex, thanks so much for joining me and giving us this time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, anytime. Thanks a lot for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, so that was Alex Kennedy of Hoops Hype. Guys, make sure you go check out his work at hoopshype.com. Always does a phenomenal job there. Really appreciate him taking the time to come on here. That's going to wrap things up for today. I will have some Lakers Nation news feed shows coming out throughout the week as news breaks, especially with the trade deadline coming up. So be on the lookout for those pieces. That's it for now. My name is Trevor Lane. This has been the Lakers Nation podcast. Make sure you guys head to LakersNation.com for all the latest on the Lakers and the upcoming trade deadline. See ya.